Great, so we're back for the last session. This one is going to be focused on importing and exporting out of Revit with a large focus on Rhino.Inside, which is a relatively new tool, makes it a million times easier to communicate between Rhino and Revit. So I'm going to show you kind of the basic way of doing it at first and what sort of settings you should use, and then we're going to go into a much better way of doing this. So to get started, I'm actually going to open up a Rhino file and show you this the old-fashioned way. So I'll just do a new document. I'm going to do large objects feet, and so here is my file, and I'm going to save this and call this Rhino Barcelona. And I've got my Barcelona Pavilion model that I'm going to use in Rhino. Now, what I like to do is get sort of a consistent location established. And remember, we talked so much about the origin point and all of that stuff at the very beginning. If I wanted to bring my model into Rhino, and again, I'm going to show you the old-fashioned way of doing it. I don't recommend doing it this way, but this is more of like a dead-end way of doing it. I'm going to go back to Revit. I'm going to go into a 3D view. And anything that you can see in this 3D view will be exported. So not just visible, but anything that is actually in this view. So things that are behind walls will go as well. It's not just visible objects. So you can set this up to show everything that you want to export. Let's say you don't want roofs for some reason. You could hide roofs, and then it won't export those. I'm going to undo that because I want it. I don't want the levels, so I'm just going to come in here again. I actually don't want any sort of annotation, so I'm going to turn that off. But besides that, I think I'm pretty happy with what I have here. The best way that I've found to bring Revit geometry into Rhino is doing it as a DWG, but there's one additional step you need to do. So I'm going to go into File, I'm going to go into Export, I'm going to go into CAD format, I'm going to go to DWG. And the one thing that I'm going to do that's different is it's kind of hard to find, but you can modify export setup, and there's a lot of different things in here. You can change your layers, you can do all sorts of different stuff. Within solids here, I want to make sure this says ACIS solids. That's really the only thing you have to do. I'm going to click OK, and then I'm going to click Next, and then I'll save this to my desktop. Excuse me. And I'll call this Barcelona Pavilion Revit export. And then I also usually don't want to export views on sheets as links and external references. In this circumstance, this is good if you have other things referenced in here. You want it all to come together. So I'll just click OK. It's going to process for a second, and this model is not very big, so it's done already. I'm going to come in here into Rhino. I'm going to do insert, or actually, I'm sorry, import. And if I go back into my primer day 3, I'm going to grab my Revit export, click open, and it's going to think for a second, and it's going to give me this thing. I have a little shortcut that SH for shaded view, but you can come here and click on that as well. So now this is imported, and it's actually, by making it a poly mesh, it keeps it as a closed solid poly surface. It will create a mesh if it's curved surface, like the topography is, but everything else will stay as a poly mesh, which is nice because I can come edit it in Rhino with a lot of the same functionality that I could in Revit, or if this was modeled natively in Rhino. It creates blocks for things like any system family, like a roof or a wall. It'll create it as a closed solid poly surface. Curtain panels, it creates blocks out of. Doors, it creates blocks out of. So it has a lot of intelligence of how it exports. And if I wanted to bring something into Rhino, I would do this, model it, click on it, go to File, Export Selected, and I found that I like to use acis.sat. The problem with this is that it comes in, if you have a bunch of things together, it comes in as one big object. So let me just show you that. So if I export selected, I'm going to go back to ACIS, and then I'll call this test geo. I can use the default options, click OK, and then if I come into Revit, and I'm going to go to Insert, I can just go into Import CAD, even though it's not an AutoCAD file. I'm going to use come here, go to .sat, and then bring my test geo in. I can pick what I want it to come in as, a generic model or a roof or a sign or something like that. But I'm just going to do generic model for now. And do I have a crop on here? My scale is off, so they came in way big, which is weird because they came in the right size. Let me undo that. Import CAD, test geo. There's no option to rescale. Oh, there we go. That came in the right way. This might have been, this was a different export that I had done earlier. I don't understand why this is coming in the right way. Let me see. There's something with the units here. So even though this came in right, there's something wrong with the units going back and forth. So what I could do is rescale these down, go to scale 0, 1 divided by 12, and then let's try that. If I take this, export these, rescaled, click OK, come back in here, import CAD, test geo rescaled. Yeah, now they're right. So there might just need to be some scaling that happens. All that being said, this is not the way that I want to do this. I want to do this using Rhino.Inside. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to just undo this back to the beginning. I'm still going to save this as my Rhino Barcelona. Let me close this, and I'm just going to kind of start clean. All right, so that's how you do it using ACISs going back and forth. But again, we want to be a little bit more intelligent, and there's some cool ways we can do that. So I'm going to use Rhino.Inside. I'm going to click on here on this tab. I'm going to click on Start, and it's going to think for a second. And once it's done thinking, all of these buttons up here at the top of the screen are going to light up, which means that Rhino.Inside has been loaded. The reason it's called Rhino.Inside is it actually runs it within Revit. So you open it up through here, you don't open it up the way you normally would. And then once these are good, I'm going to click Rhino, and it actually just opens a session of Rhino immediately. So all of the loading that it does that you would normally do to load a session of Rhino, it does that first. Then you click this, and now I actually have Rhino ready to go. I'm going to go to File, Open, and I'm going to open up my Barcelona Rhino model. It's basically empty, but just so you have it, this is where we're going to start. And I can now start to bring things in using Grasshopper. So even though you have to know a little bit of Grasshopper here, and I'm going to use some really simple Grasshopper definitions to bring stuff in. But let me type in Grasshopper. And I'm going to have a lot of windows that I'm switching back and forth here. This is obviously easier if you have a couple screens, but I'm going to just start here. And to start this process, just so you see, if you're used to Grasshopper, it adds this Revit params here to my params section. It adds a few other things into some of these other tabs as well, I think. but mainly it adds this Revit one, where you're going to be doing a lot of your Revit work. There's so many things you can do with this. It's really, really robust, and there could be an entire class on this, so I'm just going to start with some really simple stuff here in order to help you out with your class, specifically with AT4. But again, there's the world is your oyster with this. So now that I've got this set up, I'm going to bring data into Rhino from Revit, not using the clunky way that I did before of importing and exporting. So what I'm going to start with is this built-in categories, which is a list of basically all the different types of elements that Revit can bring, Rhino can bring in from Revit. This works by tapping into the API, so you'll see a lot of things that exist in here that are not standard default Revit things. However, because we are getting deep into the API of Revit, we have a lot more capabilities of what we can and can't do. So now that this is set up, you know, I'm gonna type in a lot of shortcuts here. I actually sometimes click through here to find things, but I usually type in the search by double clicking. If you hold down Control Option and click on an element, it'll show you where it exists. So this categories is in the Revit tab in input right there. So if you're ever curious to see where these things are that I'm clicking on, you hold down Control and Option or Control Alt and click on the element. Okay, so let's just start with floors for now. I'm going to come down here and I'm going to find floors because I want to bring my floors in from Revit into here. This list is pretty long, so if you want, you can click here and search. So I got my floors. I'm going to make sure that's checked. Then I'm going to clear this. And the next thing I'm going to do is use what's called a category filter. Which is here. Control click, it's in Revit category filter within filters. And I'm going to grab this. And if I use a panel, all it's doing is creating a filter off of this list. I'm sorry, not that panel, this panel. So this is giving me that. Here, it's giving me the element category filtered out. The next thing I'm going to do is go to query elements. And I'm going to run the filter into here. So if I do a panel on this, you can see that it's giving me the generic floor that's in there. I only have one floor in there. And I should see it, right? I'm not going to see it because Rhino.Inside requires you to have a geometry visualization thing in here. So the last component I need to put on here is element geometry. So if I click here and go to that, it's going to think for a second and it's going to show me the floor. So it's not in Rhino yet, because as you know, the way that Grasshopper works is it visualizes it and the geometry is not quite there yet. The one other thing I want to mention before I get too far into this is this is going to display it based off of the detail level that's used to extract the geometry. Now, this is, you know, this is by default, I think it's on coarse. So whatever it's displayed at in coarse here is what it will bring in. There's not a ton of change because floors don't really change, but certain things like columns will register as lines in coarse scale, but in medium and fine you'll actually see the thickness of the geometry. So if the things are not showing up properly, you may want to check the scale and change it to at least medium. So now I have my floor in here, and if I want to bring this in, it's as easy as just right clicking on this and baking this. So now if I close Grasshopper, you know, I'll change this layer so you know it's not red, but now I actually have that floor in here. If I reopen Grasshopper, I still have it, but it's baked in there. I just hit it by hitting Control H versus the geometry which is existing in Grasshopper. So it's existing in two places. It's duplicate. And again, for those of you that are not super familiar with Grasshopper, I'm just going to show you some basic stuff today. But the way that it works is once you bake it, it essentially creates a copy of it in Rhino, and you can do what you want with it. But it won't do that until you bake it out of here. So I'm actually going to undo that baking. And I just wanted to leave this because I don't want that in there quite yet. But now I've got all of my stuff, or my floors. I want to see my other things that I want to bring in. And again, the thing that's nice about this method is you might not need anything. So let's grab my roof. Roofs. So I'm going to hold down Control and check it. Otherwise, it's going to undo what it had done previously. So there's my roofs. And you might need to recompute it in order to see it. Or no, I'm sorry. I have this GBXML roof, which is not what I want. I want this one. So that's just one thing to be careful of. Make sure that the text below it is actually showing you what you want. So I've got that, right? Now I've got my roofs. And I probably want walls and stairs as well at a minimum. So let me go down, let me find walls. Hold down Control. Make sure you hold down Control, because if you click on just one, it'll unselect everything else. And then maybe stairs as well. Cool. So now I've got all of my stuff coming directly in from Revit. And you know, this is all dynamic. So if I come in here and I edit the footprint of this, now it's showing me in red, it's showing me the stuff that's appearing in Rhino right now. So you may want to hide that. You can just come into Rhino.Inside and turn off the preview, so you're not seeing that stuff on top of each other in here. You may want to see it, you may not. So if I change this roof and extend this out, it updates in here right away. So you see that roof extended. So if I go back into Revit, it's a little finicky. Sometimes you have to close those rather than opening Revit. Undo that, come back into here. And this again can sometimes be a little bit finicky. So you may need to just recompute and then it'll pop up. But sometimes when you've just sort of undone things and edited geometry, you might just need to recompute. So now I've got this in here that I can then start to model against and use as a reference without having to bring all that geometry in. So that's like a real basic, simple definition of how you would bring geometry from Revit into Rhino. I'm going to show you how to push geometry back in two ways. The first is the real sort of simple example of what we looked at before, which is like, what if let's just call this import geo. What if I wanted to bring this stuff in? I'm going to be on my import geo layer. I'll draw a rectangle. I'll draw this box. And I like to use what's called a geometry pipeline. I could just use a geometry component, right click, set one geometry, and bring that in. But what I actually like to do is use what's called a geometry pipeline. And if I keep my layers organized, this is a powerful way to just automatically pull stuff in to Grasshopper without having to click back and forth. So I'm going to call this import geo. That's what I want the layer name to be. And then down here, I want it to be a BREP, a boundary representation. I only want my solid geometry. If I'm building curves to kind of help me construct things, I don't want those to come in. So I'm going to click on that. And then if I actually click on geo, there it is. Now, I think this will show up in here. Yes, it'll show up here, but not as something that I can select. This is just a way for me to, quickly bring things in. If I want this to be something that I can edit directly in Revit, I'm going to use what's called a direct shape component. So I'm going to use what's called direct shape. And I'm going to click on direct shape, and I'm going to do, I believe it's add geometry direct shape. And as you can see here, within within Revit, it will, within Grasshopper, if you mouse over, it'll give you a little description of what the component does. So I'm going to set this up, and then here it's going to ask me for the name. I can provide a name if I want. Category, I'll do that in a second. Geometry is going to be this, and then M is going to be material, which we can apply. We're not going to do that right now, but all we're going to do is basically just give it a category. So I'm going to click on element, or no, let me see. I think it's in category. I can right click on this and pick what I want it to be. And so let's say I want all of this to be walls for some reason. I can click on this, and now I've got a category in there. I'm going to stick that in there, and then I'm going to stick my geometry in there, and it's going to create a direct shape. This turns black to show you that it worked. So if I click in here, I now actually have this object, which is a wall and is in Revit. So if I come back in here, I can select this, and I can start to tweak this, and actually a way to kind of do this would be to call this import walls. Change this to import walls. Then I could literally just model out some walls here. And they will show up in Revit as walls. So here's that Revit wall object. Now it's not as smart as this wall that we modeled that has a lot more stuff, but it will be categorized as a wall. If I look at it in the floor plan, it will show up with the same views as the wall and so on. So it's a way to kind of dynamically model between the two platforms and see this stuff updating live. Now, if I separate these walls and I come back into Revit, they will separate, but it'll be one object. That's that issue that I showed before with the import, because all this is doing is really streamlining the import process that I just outlined before. It's just automating the whole thing. So what I would need to do for those to be different, it's pretty straightforward, is I can just graft this, which if I right click and graft it, it basically will give these as two separate walls here in Revit. So that's a way to make sure that it doesn't group them into single elements. So that's the real quick way of doing that. Now the last thing is I may want to do something a little bit more complex here in Grasshopper, and to give you guys just a little bit of an insight into some basic Grasshopper stuff is, what if we wanted to kind of panelize a wall here in the Barcelona Pavilion? So I'm going to set up a Grasshopper inputs layer. I usually like to make Grasshopper inputs magenta. That's kind of my standard. And I could bake these geometries to make them more accurate, but I'm just going to eyeball it for now. So what I'm going to do is set up I'm going to move this wall out of the way for now. I'm going to get this curve here, and then from there I'm just going to do a little Grasshopper work. So let's say that we're going to do for the sake of this being a little bit more interesting, let's explode this, and we can make this be like curved wall. So let me do some quick grasshopper, and you can follow along and do this however you want, but I'm going to divide up these curves. This curve is the wrong way, so I'm just going to flip this. Okay. So now, if I actually, my recording just accidentally stopped there, so I'm going to kind of just try to pick back up where I left off. So I was in the middle of working on this grasshopper definition, so I could, pull this out and do like more of a curved surface or a ruled surface or something like that with a little bit more complexity to it. Again, I'll let you guys go wild with this, but this is something that would be pretty hard to model in Revit natively. And so if I was kind of just going to take this and maybe do like an extrusion or a sweep along this for like a screen wall. Let's do it as a pipe. I'm going to set the radius to be like 1/4 of an inch. Well, this is probably feet, so I'll just make it small like this. I'll cap this. So now I have this like screen wall geometry. And I'm going to make this a direct shape, add geometry, direct shape, and category. I'm going to use the same category and let's make this a wall system, or maybe we can make this a curtain system. Plug that into category, plug that into there. And I actually don't want this grafted. I want this to be all the same element, so I'm going to flatten this, plug it in. It's going to think for a second, and then if I go into Revit, I actually have my screen wall here. So this would be incredibly tedious and difficult to model in Revit, and it was just a real quick Rhino exercise. And I could always come back here and edit this, right? Like I could scale this in one direction here, and it'll update. I might have broken this. Hopefully not. There we go. Just need to think a second, come back, and it updates immediately. So now I have my curtain system screen wall that's in Revit. If I go to a floor plan, it will cut. Let me turn off this visualization here. So it's cutting like it would at the right height and all of that, and visualizing the same way that the other curtain systems will visualize as. So it's a very, very powerful tool for kind of going back and forth between the two. So you can go ahead and model something natively in Rhino and bring it in if you're not comfortable in Grasshopper, but you can also do it all through Rhino.Inside and Grasshopper. Sorry, let me correct myself. You can model it natively in Rhino and bring it in through this method, or if you want, you can build it directly on Grasshopper, but you should experiment, have fun with some different stuff here. So I'll let you guys work on that, and that's the end of this video.